Welcome to Winston's cellar. Relax, listen, enjoy. Volume 21. The Psychic Apocalypse, the Black Ships, and the Necks. The death of the Emperor was a near-lethal blow to existence itself, more so than any living being could fully comprehend. When the Emperor's heart was pierced by that most foolish of traitors, his soul, scattered and insane, burst apart, flinging itself into the swirling maelstrom. The warp washed into reality in a tidal flood, killing terror. Similarly, reality to a certain extent washed into the warp. The great edifice, the link to the webway, forged by the Imperator, was smashed from its moorings in reality and floundered in the madness sea. The living mesh that was the webway writhed and convulsed as the strand of reality tumbled through the warp. We shall come to this later. The deepest depths of the warp were disturbed, and forces beyond reckoning or sanity strove for the surface of their inverted emotion, spherical realm. They burst the surface, turning inwards and shattering like glass, as they envied and giggled and felt emotions only the most incomprehensible of Xenos ever felt. A great blanketing numbness flooded inwards, spilling outwards as it pushed in parallel to the madness. Grim sanity spread like a glass plate, sliding over a churning mad sea. It was shattered in places or melted or any number of futile analogies. The Starfather was rousing and the war migration exodus began in earnest. It would be utterly impossible to explain what was happening in the warp accurately. Thus I must drift into colorful analogy to continue. Across all the realms of chaos, from the living rot forests of Nurgle to the churning brass forges of the Lord of Rage, a great silver wall, solid and blank, was grinding, pushing aside the demonic realms like a plow through snow. The crystal maze of Tzeentch was shattered and ground to dust, then reformed, and was shattered anew. The rings of Slaanesh's inferno were breached as the faceless, blade-winged angels of the Starfather spread forth, one with the wall, yet apart from it. At last, Khorne could take no more. A voice that could shatter continents resounded across the entire realm of chaos, plunging mountains into lava lakes and pulverizing demon trees and devil spawn. It was a call to war as he rose from the skull throne, black sword of destruction clutched in his vast talons. A billion demons arose with him, from bloodthirsters to blood crushers and other indescribable horrors. Legions of demon princes, armored with demon mail and blades of lethal effect, marched under banners of slaughtered skin and bloodied flesh. Khorne himself besieged the great silver wall, pounding it with every weapon and devil he could. The wall constantly shattered, yet merely split into innumerable, grinding walls, which ensnared the blood god, who howled in frustration. The mindless Skarbrand dueled the Dominion itself, Malkador Angel. Infinite energies flowed across the beings, as fire fought light and bloody blade clashed with burnished nightmare steel. The walls continued, smashing aside even the formless waste, spearing through like a thunderbolt. Tzeentch, using every trick and scheme and power, misdirected and deceived the walls, splitting them and dividing them, as he hastily made alliances and dark pacts with his brothers and sisters. Guided by the babbling predictions of the Fate Weaver, Tzeentch tricked and tracked the infinite enemy, and guided his enemy allies against this true threat. The great game took on a new face. Nurgle, advised by his brother, cast a bile-filled contagion, which tarnished the Silver Bastions and allowed plague-bearers and capering demonettes to wriggle within the structure. Innumerable devils and monsters dueled the blank beings which glowed within, formless yet mighty and bleak. Nurgle, empowered by the despair of the losing battle, surged forth, resplendent and powerful. A morass of stinking flesh and foulness formed his bulk, and he sprouted rotten forests of decay in his slug-like wake as he drew forth his cauldron to personally pour its contents down the Soul Father's throat. He boiled the silver wall aside as his corruptive influence plunged through into the star realm. Like a billion universes, stars and tranquil evening skies filled the bastion in all directions, and Nurgle himself had to form a bridge of corruption just across the expanse. And there, at the center of the spiral, stood the Starfather. 1,000 miles tall, the Colossus glowed a blinding gold, and where his burning golden stare landed, corruption could not flourish. Chaos became set. Trillions of souls stood, utterly frozen under the gaze of the Starfather, unthinking, unfeeling. One by one, the great being plucked them up and broke them. He had no face, just a titanic golden crown which enclosed his head and blazed with internal fire. Nurgle, undaunted, ploughed forth like a living tide of filth. The blades of the Father smashed the demon thing to the ground, and Nurgle's corrupted blades just held back the merciless force of the Starfather. Then something even the grandfather of disease couldn't predict occurred. Upon pinions of flayed and stagnant flesh, the angel of despair, Aisha herself, appeared. Wriggling free of her chains, the goddess wailed, howling in agony and misery, flickering tears of despair rattling against the Order God's impregnable armor. Over the eternity of imprisonment, she was quite insane, and such was Nurgle's influence that she was bound to him eternally in a marriage of abomination. He, the Starfather, paused, his voice a deep rumble as glacial ice over rocks. "Obey!" he bawled, swatting Aisha aside. However, her intent was never to defeat him. Her freedom had attracted another being that lusted after her essence. Suddenly, a dozen singing blades sank into the armor of the Starfather as the Prince of Pleasure, she who thirsts, slithered upwards to engage the monster. The Father wrestled the heinous goddess god, venom, fire, and blades darting and twisting beneath and above the combat, as God faced God. Nurgle became a vast swamp, ensnaring the titanic legs of the Starfather with sucking demonic mud. Angels poured from the walls and roofs at the sight of the Starfather in distress, echoing him utterly as they plunged into combat. Demons wriggled from between the toes and talons of the battling chaos gods, intercepting the glowing beings engaging in epic conflict. The bastions advanced and retreated, as the other realms plunged over each other like tides on a beach, coming from all angles at once. The three gods wrestled, but the Starfather was the stronger, and he beat them back, his voice a thunderous gale, as he cursed and bellowed at the hated foes. Whispers and confusing illusions assailed the Starfather and saved Slaanesh and Nurgle, as Tzeentch worked his illusions and magics upon the God of Order. Amazingly, the Starfather and his angels fought back all these endless foes. Their gold and silver light was as a torch to hay, as it burnt and scorched the demons fiercely, flinging them backwards, filling their hearts with the dread of order. As they faltered, the final god descended. Smashing through the crystal roof of the bastions, Khorne leapt into the star realm. His first strike struck the helm of the Starfather, dealing him a deathly blow and staggering the confused god. The second flurry of blows were parried desperately by the flaming golden blade of the Starfather. The five gods exchanged and traded blows for eternities upon eternities, destroying realms, only to remake them within instants. Demons and angels wailed and bitterly fought as they were plunged into oblivion again and again, However, this war was one thing the Starfather could not control. It was chaotic. The chaos unleashed upon everything and everybody within the realm of the warp fought the primordial annihilator's strengths. Chaos drove back order, and the order god was cast down. Yet such was his power, he could not be banished as demons and spirits could be. He became a fixed, dreadful point in the ever-mad seas of souls. Of course, this account above is merely an analogy, for the churning storm of abomination which rippled throughout the warp in all directions and chronologies defies description and explanation. It snatched away the souls of almost all astropaths, dragging them into the bodies of angels to fight the incomprehensible war. It made the deep warp an impenetrable bastion of utter lunacy, destroying any vessels traveling through those routes. Only the shallows of the warp were safe now. Of the black ships, many separate tragedies befell them. Vessels dedicated to rounding up psychers and transporting them to Terra, the ships were suddenly made obsolete as the Astronomicon spluttered over the course of years, until it was nothing. Then Terra tumbled into hell, and madness took hold of the galaxy. The ship, crammed with psychers that were about to enter the warp, suddenly were forced to pull away, their navigators going mad instantly. They became becalmed, trapped in the void, light years from anywhere. Trapped in reality, psychers, driven insane and empowered by the churning warp, fought at their restraints and cells. The grim, dark halls of the psyker ships became battlegrounds where cold-hearted stormtroopers and sororitas engaged the gibbering hordes of psyker horrors. Soon these black ships became tomb ships as their defenders engaged their fail-safe devices, pumping cyanide and neurotoxins throughout the vessels, mutually destroying both Imperial and Monster. They were the lucky ones. Many of the black ships were trapped within the warp as the guiding light faltered. Some were torn asunder instantly. Others became utterly lost in the warp, their navigators lost or executed. Some, believing they had rediscovered the Astronomicon, headed towards an area of deep warp, where a golden light seemed to becalm the warp. These vessels disappeared, frozen forever in mid-action. The infant star child had ensnared them forever. Others crashed into driving hulks, fusing at the physical and even spiritual level. Their liberated cargo would then flee into the depths of the hulks, or else die, moaning silently as their bodies fused painfully with the walls. The most infamous example of a black ship through the warp was that of the Tursis. Its tail is long and, in some places, incomprehensible. Nevertheless, I shall endeavor to narrate their tale. The Tursis captain, as the beacon of the Astronomicon vanished, ordered the ship to leave the warp immediately. The navigator tried his best, wrestling his ship through the unimaginable tides and fluctuations as things beyond understanding clashed and rolled within the madness. He approached the shallows. To his horror, however, there was no reality beyond, and they plunged back into the madness. They were lost forever. The navigator soon began to descend into madness and was replaced by his assistant. He was killed by his minder with a bolt to the brain, battered by the tides and churning masses of maddening warp stuff, battering the Geller field. The Tursis dived. Like a black dart, they descended upwards into the surrounding deep warp. The engines bucked and hissed and crackled. Smoke and murderous vapors filled the cabins of the ship, incensing and driving the psychers beyond sanity. They launched all their psychic abilities against the cells and restraints, burning out their broken minds. The sisters on board, led by Sister Superior Medellin, fought like legends, slaughtering and murdering the flaming witches wherever they found them. Stormtroopers barricaded all then on-cell chambers, barring the entrance of the mad warp terrors. The actual ship's crew managed to be protected from the worst of the horrors. Every human chanted litanies of protection and prayers to the Emperor. The ship plummeted faster and faster and slower as they ascended into the deepness of the most dark and unbound warp depths. The walls began to bleed as gibbering things shoved their way into their reality bubble. Talons and tentacles everywhere. Hellguns glowed white-hot. Such was their rate of fire. Bolters barked and roared, blasting chunks of masonry and maggot-ridden flesh architecture as power weapons and holy objects smashed apart devil-faced demons and scuttled semi-humanoids and psyker monsters, all fire and misery as they literally flew at their foes, blazing talons drawn. Still, they endured as they plunged into the deep warp even deeper and ever outwards. Slug monsters emerged in the engine block, and the Magos aboard fought them with all his cold, logical might. Unfurling dozens of bladed mechanical appendages, the Magos flung himself at the slug-wolf things, cackling binary nonsense as he howled mechanically. He hacked down countless hundreds of the things, but their blood just clung to the walls, and sprouted more devils, which surrounded and befouled him, dragging him down into their foul embrace. The Gellerfield failed. Like a foul gale, the walls began to shatter and bleed as they came apart at the instant of failure. Suddenly they regained integrity, the ship reforming partially. The demons eased off and were forced back at great cost. Only then did the defenders gaze outside. The fallen edifice, the fragment of reality tumbling warded down into the upper heights of the deep warp. They had crashed inside it. Unlight flooded the view screens as they gazed across the strange realm which loomed under and over them simultaneously. Though it crawled with runes and was painful to even look upon, the crew realized it was, in fact, real. Some of the more desperate, insane crew forced open access hatches and crawled out into this mad wilderness, sobbing with hope and elation. The ground above them formed into multicolored horrors and dragged them off through the floor, into the warp. Hope was not a safe emotion to exude, evidently. The hatches were sealed soon after this, and so, riding upon a diseased fragment of reality, the black ship plunged. Monsters assailed the defenders at random, plunging into the ship with no effort. Back to back, the troopers and sisters fought, battering back the devilish foes. They fired their pistols until spent. They hacked with blades until blunt and broken. They battled with fists until their limbs were broken and useless. Then they fought with their teeth and their bodies. Desperately, the underlings of the Magos sought to repair the destroyed Geller field, as demons lapped mere inches from their workspace, held back only by the wild, savage strength of the desperate stormtroopers and sororitas. To the great surprise of several defending Imperials, the surviving Psykers fought back against the demons, driving them back with sorcerous chants and searing warp blasts. One such patient, the former occupant of cell number 1, pulverized demons and warp creatures, his vast psychic energies driving the monsters insane and bursting their stolen bodies. It was said the Psyker even saved the life of Medellin, boiling the blood of a tusked demon in mail armor as it reared over her prone form. Aided by their surviving Psyker quarry, the defenders forced back the beasts as the Geller field shuddered, spluttering into life once more. As they tumbled, the various defenders began to age. Some grew older rapidly, some stayed the same age, while others began to get more youthful. Others were slowly devoured by the walls, wailing weakly, as the possessed metal sucked them in like quicksand, They ate mutant and demon flesh. They drank stagnant blood and thick, sentient fluids. In the immaterial realm, the defenders became something less than human, something more than mortal. The miserable and monstrous occupants of the vessel began to copulate and fornicate as the years wore on. Their children were hoofed and twisted, bawling bundles of claws and malice. Yet still they tumbled. None can possibly say how far and how long they tumbled, for both measurements are irrelevant in the warp. The ship fell past countless indefinable horrors and wonders that would make a saint weep. Eventually they entered the final depth, the full doom. And they screamed, "Nex, not Cortan," and there was ice fire in their hearts. Yet the ship, shorn of its reality raft, descended up and across, evading the lingering tendrils of the Nex. What happened in the realm cannot be explained, nor should it. The Psyker from Cell 1 purged the souls of dozens of his followers, boiling their souls, for fear that any trace of the Nex remained within them. But it seemed as though sanity began to reassert itself. Gravity began to express itself upon their limbs. Air began to have a taste, not just an emotion once more. The walls were solid for the most part. Each defender of the ship now had a single shape, unlike in the final depth. Eventually, with a burst of mind-shattering horror, the Tursis emerged, heralded by a storm of bile and colored lights. They emerged in 99 M42, roughly 100 years since becoming ensnared in the immaterial. It was a darkly changed vessel now. Like a semi-living flesh shark, the possessed vessel drifted, a hellscape made flesh. Arm in arm, the corrupted Medellin and the Witch Lord of Cell Number 1 resided over a crew of twisted monsters who worked the machineries of the vessel as if all was normal, their minds shattered and splintered. This horrific ordeal was not unique to the Tursis. Vessels lost in the warp would frequently, throughout the Second Age of Strife, emerge from the warp, transformed into colossal, warp-possessed beasts, which would then fall upon unsuspecting mortal worlds, attacking furiously with fangs and warpish flame. These common occurrences would later be nicknamed Hell Subs, due to the submerged nature of the twisted wrecks, compared with the numbing abomination of the deep warp. For as the mariners of ancient legend would warn, there be monsters,